Keir Starmer joined in the studio now by David Shipley. He's a former prisoner but has moved on from that. He's now a writer and researcher on prison and justice issues. A very, very good afternoon to you.
Thanks.
I want to ask you about the grooming gang scandal. We just had that with some dominated PMQs. It's dominating a lot of the newspapers today. How do we resolve this, and who should chair an inquiry? What should the remit be?
Yeah, I know it's terrible. I think I understand now that 4 of the survivors have quit because they've said that the people organising the inquiry are trying to expand it so it's just broadly about child sexual abuse, which would dilute away the focus, which needs to be on the very specific racist and racialised targeting of white and Sikh girls by primarily Pakistani Mirpuri men. And that's the core of this that was covered up for decades, as we know.
Because of the ethnicity and race of the perpetrators. Exactly,
because there's this fear of being seen as racist or disrupting community relations and all these sorts of things. And I think what's been really disgusting this week is seeing Jess Phillips essentially seeming to call the survivors liars when they were saying they had communicated these fears to her. At least one survivor has shown what she says are text messages between her and Jess Phillips, making these issues clear, saying that the survivors are feeling very unhappy.
But no, basically they were asked to try and water it down. Jess Phillips says no, they weren't. Well, here's the document saying, shall we widen the scope?
Exactly. And indeed, last night the Home Secretary, I think, did brilliantly on this. She put out a statement and she was very clear. She said, I'm even rejecting this term grooming gang. She said they are evil child rapists, which I think is a very, very clear point here. And she made it clear that the inquiry is going to remain very focused on the specific
Well,
nature
wait a minute.
of these crimes.
You say that it's going to remain. The inquiry, nothing's happened. It's 4 months on. We haven't even got a chair. Who could be a chair? You write on justice issues. Who could be a chair? Because we've had a leading former social worker. She's going for, I don't want to be in the firing line. Basically, don't want to be on the shortlist. We have got Jim Gamble, who's a former senior police officer, therefore unacceptable to some of the survivors. They don't all speak with the same voice, but he has had a massive, wonderful record working at CEOPS, working against child exploitation, particularly online. I mean, he would be a good choice to me, but does it have to be a judge?
I don't think it has to be a judge. I think it needs to be an inquiry which is going to investigate, compel testimony, and ultimately lead to criminal prosecutions for those people.
Otherwise, what's the point?
Absolutely. This needs to be resolved through, frankly, mass prosecutions of public servants who have been involved.
And
in
it does need to be mass, doesn't it? It can't just be a couple of people that will all pretend. This isn't a one-off event where someone knew something and didn't do anything. We're not talking about even just whether it's a terror attack or something awful, at a football match. We are talking about decades of abuse of thousands of girls across the country and thousands upon thousands of officials basically going, nothing to see here.
Exactly, and it's actually hundreds of thousands, we think. And you have had over decades, this has been facilitated by and covered up by police, by social workers. In one case, a social worker actually allowed the victim to marry her abuser in an Islamic marriage ceremony.
And she attended. The social worker attended the marriage.
Yes, exactly. So there are so many. There are so many guilty people here, and this is the scale of these crimes is almost unimaginable. And I think this is why the inquiry needs to tear this back. And yes, the police officers, the social workers, the council staff who have been complicit in this, all of them need to face public prosecution. Ultimately, we will no doubt need to strip people's public sector pensions, honours where they've received them away. This needs to be public and final.
There needs to be pain and a clear message going out in the future if you cover this stuff up. Because people cover it up because they're scared for their own job and their own career prospects. Well, you need to be scared, more scared of the alternative.
They need to be more scared of what are the consequences for betraying the most vulnerable children in our society in such a terrible way.
Doing your basic job forget even as your job, just basically behaving as a moral human being. Look, we've had this row going on between the Tories and Labour as well on the issue of early release of prisoners. And look, you and I both know that not enough prison places were built, while the Tories for 14 years did actually, I'd say to their credit, they did actually put people behind bars for longer for the crimes that we expect people to go to behind bars for violence and sexual assaults and the like. Unfortunately, they didn't build enough prison spaces. I think 500 in total they actually built.
I think it might have been less. It was around.
They planned for it to be thousands, but they weren't. They don't count unless you got a prisoner in them. And the music stopped. Labour were left holding this particular parcel. They've had to do these early release. Now, we were told that it wouldn't be sex offenders, it wouldn't be domestic abusers, but it has been. Now, there was a vote in Parliament about not allowing rapists and paedophiles and others to be given shorter jail sentences to basically ease prison space. And the Tories said, well, that was blocked by Labour. Labour voted against that. Is that a fair assessment of what's actually happening?
Yeah, I think fundamentally the problem is we're not able to build prison places. So actually,
why not? The government owns loads of land. Build a prison.
Yeah, this is the wider problem. The British state, we can't build anything. We spend decades not building nuclear power plants, not building railway lines. We also spend decades not building prisons. I think part of it is civil service procurement. This is very boring, but essentially the civil service puts people into procurement jobs and who have no experience of procurement. They don't consider it a profession. So you get these people who are just senior civil servants but have never worked in procurement, negotiating against...
I say, old chap.
Sure, and negotiating against these very highly experienced people from the construction industry or whatever company, and they get outclassed. And so the procurement is a disaster. Even like the government's ongoing prison building plans have been labelled as unattainable now because one of the companies they gave a contract to has collapsed. So we're not going to build more prisons. Yeah, and I think.
But either way, we've got a whole load of people. I mean, not many people get arrested for crimes anymore. Very few people get charged with a crime. Very few people get prosecuted for a crime. Very few people actually end up getting sentenced to time behind bars. And then they're being let out a third of the way through their punishment. It's an absolute joke. People are not happy with it, and now it includes rapists and paedophiles. I mean, a lot of people might think, what's the point of even calling the police?
It's understandable, yeah. If you look at the rate at which crimes are solved, crimes of the victim now, only about 8 or 9% actually result in someone being charged or cautioned or anything. So that's the solve rate. And
my bag thief has been charged. He just doesn't turn up to court, and there's nothing happening. I sent my monthly email to the police yesterday. Hello. Just wondering what's actually being done to make this person actually face the charges that have been brought against him.
And I think this is what people are frustrated by. There's no sense of justice being done all the way through the process. If you go back 10 years, maybe 25-30% of crimes of the victim resulted in a charge.
Well done us.
Which was still bad, but much better than less than 10%. So now more than 90% of crimes with a victim, no one gets caught. So as someone who might be committing crime, you have a high certainty that you won't get caught.
You got caught.
I know, I did. But I think now that was almost 10 years ago. But I think the system itself isn't working. And then when people do get caught, often the punishment people feel is not particularly satisfactory. And we have no prison spaces. But also, when people are in prison, nothing good's happening. Our prisons are so overcrowded and so full of drugs. We're just locking people away, in most cases, for 22 hours a day, staring at daytime TV. They're not doing any rehabilitation work. We're not getting onto education or training or courses so that when they leave, they've got a chance of changing their lives. So the whole thing is a mess. And actually, we need to think not just about capacity in prisons, but what happens when people are there.
Yeah, and actually some of the countries do it very well. And again, it does affect the reoffending rate of people actually, I mean, again, we know a lot of the people who go to prison actually come from homes. I'm not making excuses for people, but they come from homes where, perhaps some worse choices were available to them and been failed by state schools, mum and dad and everybody. Claire Pistol, look, you worked at the Home Office, not in the field of in terms of dealing with police and crime. You're doing it more on the immigration side, weren't you? But I mean, this is a disaster. But I mean, Kemi Badenoch and others basically saying, look, the government's letting all these people out, and it's their fault. But you guys didn't build any prisons.
Yeah, no, and David's right. We have such a problem in this country actually getting anything done. The Lower Thames crossing, prime case example. My son is 16. The paperwork was started before he was born, and there's still not a spade in the ground. And here we are. And
China builds, airports once a week. I mean,
they do. They build enormous bridges, train stations, train tracks. We can't even get a prison.
This is part of a sort of an endemic problem, which fair Labour are trying to get on top of in terms of planning reforms. Takes a while again,
take a while.
But I mean, I try and give fair analysis. At least they're trying to reform that.
Yeah,
Your lot said they'd do it, and then they turned out an awful lot of Tory MPs went, you didn't, because I don't want anyone actually building a housing estate near our lovely village in the countryside.
That's it. Nobody wants a prison next to them. Now, actually, I think that's probably the best thing. If you're going to have anything, I'd much rather have that than an estate full of houses because they're contained.
Quiet at night and very little traffic.
Yes. Quite. But no, we are culpable as the Labour government as well.
Again, this is the old plague on both houses.
This is where the French, I think, do it much better because they.
God, that was a painful thing to hear.
They do though. They'll use national legislation.
The former president is in prison right now. I just want to throw that out there.
Also true. But they use national legislation just to enforce building. They don't allow local objections and rights to block infrastructure.
But it is interesting.
Built.
So, we've got paedophiles, rapists, and goodness knows going to be back on the streets because we've got problems with our planning system. It's amazing how sort of joined up all these issues are, and frankly, how dull and boring a lot of the real meaty stuff that needs to be dealt with is in this country. It'd be nice if we had someone in who could deal with it all, eh?